Good evening. Prepare yourselves, because we now travel thousands of years back to the banks of the Nile, to a civilization known for its pyramids, pharaohs, and gods who watched their every move. But behind the golden masks and grandiose temples, a much harsher reality hides. Today we ask, what if you lived for just one day in ancient Egypt? Because let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will roast you alive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? It is always fascinating to see who joins us from all over the world. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of pyramids, gods, and relentless ultraviolet radiation. In the extreme heat of the Egyptian night, you, as a humble peasant, might dream of the beneficent flooding of the Nile, the dark, vital inundation that would bring fertility to your parched fields, ensuring the abundance of barley and wheat, the sustenance of your family. You might dream of the golden desert sands transforming into green expanses, with your hands guiding the plough, pulled by strong oxen, with the promise of a generous harvest that would fill the granaries to the brim. Perhaps, in your reverie, you would see the bright eyes of your children laughing and their stomachs full, the worry of hunger vanishing like the morning mist under the rising Sunday. This recurring dream, woven with the hope of survival and prosperity, would be an echo of the very life you longed for, a reflection of the powerful dependence on the river that shaped your existence and that of the entire kingdom, a silent yearning for the divine blessing that emanated from the sacred waters. But the reality is that, before you even open your eyes, the sun is already bursting through your reed hut as if it were auditioning for the role of an implacable sky god. There are no curtains or blinds, and certainly no air conditioning, just the raw, relentless desert heat baking everything, including you, before breakfast. You are lying on a straw mat with a linen sheet that is more of a suggestion than a protection. The Nile breeze they promised you in all those travel documentaries. Yeah, it left. It probably died around 2800 BC. By the time you stumble outside, the temperature is already flirting with 90.4 farads, about 32.4 C, and it's not even mid-morning. The sun doesn't just shine in ancient Egypt. It attacks. Your linen tunic is useless. It's like wearing tissue paper in a sauna. And don't even think about sunscreen. There is no aloe vera, no SPF 50, not even a floppy hat with a beach resort logo. The ancient Egyptians had protective oils, but unless you are rich or work in a temple, you aren't getting any. Your best bet is to smear yourself with mud or crocodile dung, which apparently might keep you from turning into a human torch. By noon, the stones under your feet are hot enough to cook lentils. Shade is a luxury. Trees are rare. You might get a little relief by hiding behind a mud brick wall, but even that wall is sweating by this point. You, on the other hand, look like someone threw you into a clay oven and forgot to set a timer. And you better not complain. Ra, the sun god, is watching. And in ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just weather, it was divine authority. The hotter the day, the more powerful Ra felt. So basically, if you are melting, it's a spiritual compliment. In short, surviving a day in ancient Egypt requires hydration, humility, and an iron tolerance for feeling like a roasted chicken. And this is just the morning. Finally, you are out of bed, or rather, off your scratchy straw mat. And the good news is, the Nile is just a short walk away. The bad news is, you can already smell it before you see it. Yes, the mighty Nile, the giver of life to ancient Egypt, revered as sacred, the reason civilization here even exists. But let's be honest, it also smells like a fish market had a bad breakup with a swamp. The banks are teeming with flies, frogs, and things that probably shouldn't have legs, but do. This is where you bathe. Soap hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had, you couldn't afford it. Instead, you lather up with the day's freshest cleaning technology, sand. That's right, Egyptian-style exfoliation. You just rub coarse grains all over yourself and call it skincare. It's like nature's sandpaper, but less effective. Washing clothes is also done in the Nile. And by washing, we mean beating them against rocks, all while praying a crocodile doesn't mistake your dirty laundry for a tasty midday snack. Oh, and to make it even more fun, let's not forget the occasional sewage runoff from upstream. Remember, people, livestock, and the occasional funeral barge all share this river, And yet, somehow this is considered clean. You scrub, you rinse, and you emerge feeling slightly less sticky and only moderately more concerned about leeches. If you are a city dweller in Memphis or Thebes, you might be lucky enough to use a public basin or cistern. But for everyone else, it's the Nile or nothing. And don't expect privacy. This is a public bathing space shared by families, neighbors, cattle, and the odd ibis pecking around your ankles like it pays rent. The water jars are filled and balanced on heads, carried back to your mud brick home, before the midday heat turns the clay to toast. It's a daily ritual, spiritual, necessary, and slightly traumatic. So yes, the Nile is sacred. It feeds you, it cleans you, and it quenches your thirst. But let's not pretend it's a sparkling oasis. In reality, it's part miracle, part biohazard, and all you've got. By now, you have bathed in the crocodile-infested Nile, sanded yourself semi-clean, and your body feels like a baked fig. It's time for breakfast, the most important and least glamorous meal of your ancient Egyptian day. Let's set the expectations. There are no eggs Benedict, no fruit bowls, and absolutely no iced lattes. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less a culinary event and more a tactical refueling operation. You sit on a low stool, if you have one, or just squat in the corner, like everyone else. The centerpiece of your meal, bread, lots of it, dense, coarse, and often as hard as a leather sandal. It's made from emmer wheat or barley and baked in clay ovens that may or may not be shared by the local rats. And don't be surprised if there's sand in your slice, not as a topping, but as an uninvited ingredient from the grinding stones. A daily dose of minerals, you might say. Then comes the beer. But don't get excited. This isn't a crisp, bubbly craft ale. It's a thick, cloudy, lukewarm liquid, more gruel than pint. It's packed with calories and vaguely fermented. A medieval smoothie with a slight taste of sour cereal and survival. Even the children drink it, not to be rebellious, but because it's safer than the water. At least the brewing process boils off the parasites, unlike the Nile, which, as we just discussed, is basically a petri dish. If you are lucky, and we mean really lucky, you might get an onion or a few dried dates to go with your carb foam combo. Protein. Only if someone caught something and didn't immediately eat it raw. And as you chew your rock-like bread and sip your grain sludge, the flies buzz around you like it's a buffet. Because for them, it is. You swat them away with one hand, hold your cup with the other, and try not to think too hard about the fact that this is probably the best meal you'll have today. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about taste, it's about function. It fuels your body just enough to survive until the next time someone hands you another sandy brick of bread. Bon appetit. You've had your gritty bread, your thick beer, and just barely enough to be considered functional. Now it's time for work. And believe me, labor in ancient Egypt makes modern burnout look like a spa day. Unless you are a scribe, priest, or royalty. And let's be honest, you aren't. Your job is pure brute force and dust. No air-conditioned cubicle, no coffee breaks, no ergonomic chairs. Just sweat, sand, and a constant risk of collapsing before noon. If you are a farmer, you are ankle-deep in Nile mud by sunrise, pulling weeds or planting barley under the gaze of a foreman whose hobby seems to be yelling at you. You use wooden plows, crude sickles, and your own hands. If your back hurts, congratulations. That means it's working. If you are a laborer, things get even more biblical. Imagine hauling multi-ton stones for temple construction under a blazing sun, barefoot, up ramps made of gravel and prayers. There is no OSHA here. If you trip, it's a broken ankle and a shrug from the overseer. Working in the tombs is another level of toil. You are hammering limestone, chiseling out burial chambers for people who will get more rest than you ever will. And if you mess up a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say job security might involve a sealed chamber and a curse. And if you are a woman, you are not spared. Domestic work is also physical labor, grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, raising children, and still helping in the fields. Your break is when the baby sleeps for 7 minutes while you prepare dinner. You eat on the go, wipe sweat on your tunic. You keep moving because slowing down means falling behind. Falling behind means someone else gets your grain quota, and you get the blame. There is no clocking out. The sun is your supervisor. When it finally sinks behind the horizon, you crawl home half dead, caked in dust, and dreaming of softer sandals and a less aggressive sun god. Work in ancient Egypt isn't just hard, it's endless. It is a full-body commitment to survival, day after day, until your body gives out or your foreman decides you aren't worth feeding. And that's not even the worst of it. After sweating your soul out in the fields or the quarry, you might be tempted to grumble. Maybe something small, a little, "This job stinks." Or, "Why am I doing this again?" Stop right there. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining isn't just frowned upon, it's potentially treason. Why? Because your boss isn't just a ruler, he's a literal god. The pharaoh is not some guy who got elected or born into a lucky family. He is the human incarnation of Horus, son of Ra, chosen by the heavens to rule Egypt and keep Ma'at, the divine cosmic order, intact. In other words, if the river floods this year, thank the pharaoh. If it doesn't, maybe you didn't pray hard enough. Questioning his authority isn't just rude, it's blasphemy. Speaking ill of him could earn you an appointment with a whip, a set of shackles, or an early trip to the underworld without any of your favorite burial goods. You will see his face everywhere. On statues, temple walls, coins, even bread molds. His name is chanted in rituals, his image painted larger than everyone else's in every mural. That's not artistic exaggeration. It's law. And don't expect to ever see him if you are a commoner. The closest you'll get is watching a golden barge float by during a religious festival. Blink, and he's gone, back to a palace you will never enter, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to finance a small civilization. Which, fun fact, he basically does. If you are lucky enough to work on a royal project, say a tomb, a temple, or a mountain-sized statue, you serve with divine joy. At least, that's what the state says. You say it too, because pretending you are honored to carve stone for 14 hours a day is safer than the alternative. And don't even think about rebellion. Pharaohs crush uprisings faster than you can say dynasty. Just ask the last village that tried to withhold taxes. Oh wait, you can't. It doesn't exist anymore. So yes, the pharaoh is divine, and you are just lucky you are allowed to sweat in his name. Now, get back to work. If you thought surviving the sun was hard, wait until you realize that in ancient Egypt, sand is your roommate, colleague, condiment, and mortal enemy. It is everywhere. In your clothes, in your bed, in your food. There is no escape. You could be working, praying, sleeping, or minding your business at the market, and suddenly a gust of hot wind hits you and turns your face into a gritty exfoliation experiment you did not ask for. Let's start with the clothes you wear. Linen. It's light, it's breathable, and it's about as effective at keeping out sand as a screen door is at stopping soup. It slips through your tunic, sticks to your skin, and somehow gets into places you didn't know you had folds. Eating. Good luck. Every loaf of bread is basically a sand trap, since the flour was ground between stone slabs. Tiny bits of grit worked their way into the dough. Egyptians didn't just eat their wheat, they ate their grinding stones. It's why ancient dental remains are often worn down and flat as river rocks. Imagine chewing your breakfast while also giving yourself a daily tooth filing. And if you thought your house was a sand-free zone, think again. Your mud brick home has gaps, cracks, and windows with no glass. Perfect portals for wind-blown grit. Your floors are covered. Your cooking pots are full. Your bed is basically a sandbox disguised as furniture. Shoes, optional at best. Most Egyptians walked barefoot, which means you are always one step away from turning your feet into battered leather sandals. If you do have footwear, it's usually a basic pair of sandals made of reeds, fashionable perhaps, not remotely protective. Then there are the sandstorms, Egypt's version of a slap from the gods. Sudden, swirling, blinding. One minute you are talking to a friend. The next you are spitting dust and feeling like someone emptied an entire beach into your eye sockets. Visibility drops to zero, and everyone around you becomes a vaguely coughing silhouette. In short, sand is the roommate that never leaves. The spice in every meal and the silent enemy of your eyes, lungs, and dignity. It's not just the backdrop to your life. It's now part of your body. And no, you can't wash it off. You already tried that in the Nile, which is probably full of even more sand. In ancient Egypt, religion isn't just a weekend activity. It's the operating system for everything. Your job, your diet, your hygiene routine, your bedtime rituals. all dictated by gods who seem to have very specific opinions. Understand this first. The gods are everywhere. Your village has temples dedicated to a dozen different deities, each responsible for some vital function. There's Ra, who pilots the sun across the sky like it's a divine Uber. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, is in charge of scribes and lunar calendars. Sobek, half crocodile, half nightmare fuel, guards the Nile. And Bastet, the cat goddess, basically runs public relations. Forget personal freedom. Your daily routine revolves around pleasing them. You wake up, you thank Ra, you spill a little beer, apologizing to Hathor for the waste. You stub your toe, cursing quietly so as not to attract a spiteful spirit. Before meals, you offer a bit of food to the gods. Before bed, you pray that Seth, the god of chaos, doesn't throw your house into existential disarray overnight. Even funerals are multi-day affairs where the deceased must pass tests, avoid demons, and prove they were morally decent, or risk eternal annihilation. Speaking of the afterlife, the ancient Egyptians took it very seriously. You don't just die and move on. You must undergo a judgment process involving the weighing of your heart against a feather of truth. If your heart is heavier due to lies, cruelty, or maybe stealing someone's goat, you get eaten by Amit, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of your worst nightmare. So yes, even in death, you are still on probation. But here is the twist. This complex belief system isn't depressing. It's comforting. The Egyptians believed life was part of a cosmic balance, and if you followed the rituals and upheld Ma'at, the principle of truth and order, you had a chance at a peaceful eternity, complete with food, family, and perhaps a boat. Of course, the richer you were, the more the gods seemed to notice. Temples were massive, priests were powerful, and peasants. Well, you just hoped the gods were feeling generous that day, because in ancient Egypt, faith isn't optional. It's your job description, your insurance plan, and your travel itinerary for the next life. So you've stepped on something sharp, been bitten by something strange, or caught something contagious, which in ancient Egypt is basically Tuesday. It's time to seek medical care. Just don't expect a waiting room or a sterile environment. You are about to be cured with a combination of spells, herbs, and sheer optimism. First, you'll be taken to a physician, and to be fair, they were some of the most advanced in the ancient world. They had surgical tools, medical texts, and a decent understanding of anatomy. But here's the catch. Science in ancient Egypt always came with a heavy dose of magic. They give you a poultice made of honey, moldy bread, and crushed herbs. The honey is actually antibacterial, and the mold has early penicillin properties, so it kind of works. But before applying it, the healer will chant a protective spell, just in case, because you never know when your stomach cramps are actually the result of a spiteful ghost or an angry god. Headache? You might get a dose of crushed onions rubbed on your scalp while someone recites a hymn to Thoth. A mysterious rash? Let's try smearing cow dung mixed with dates on your chest and see what happens. Eye infection? Time for a paste of lizard blood, ochre, and beer, plus a prayer to Horus. Surgery did happen sometimes. Abscesses were drained, bones were set, and wounds were stitched with linen thread, but there was no anesthesia, just a sharp knife and a friend to hold your shoulders down while you screamed into a mud brick pillow. Dentistry was not great. Remember all that sand in the bread? Your teeth are worn to nubs by age 20. If one gets infected, your options are 1. Live with it, 2. Die from it, or 3. Have it pulled out with something resembling pliers made by a blacksmith with low standards. And let's not forget the amulets. Whether you are giving birth, getting stitched up, or just sneezing too hard, a good physician priest will probably hang an amulet around your neck, just in case the real problem is an invisible snake spirit coiled around your spleen. So yes, Egyptian medicine had its moments. But mostly, you better believe in the gods, because your band-aid is literally a prayer. Here is an unexpected twist that many people don't know. The women of ancient Egypt had more rights than many women in later civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, file for divorce, and even take a man to court. Sounds progressive, right? But before you pack your bags for a time-traveling girl boss vacation, hold on, because while their legal status might impress you, the daily reality was not so glamorous. If you are a woman in ancient Egypt, you probably wake up before dawn. You are grinding grain by hand using a giant flat stone that crushes both the wheat and your spine. Then it's off to haul water from the Nile, cook breakfast, mind the children, manage the household, feed the animals, and, if needed, help in the fields. You are a one-woman labor force dressed in linen. There is no me time, no spa days, and definitely no maternity leave. Childbirth is risky and painful. Midwives are helpful, sure, but there are no epidurals, no disinfectant, and not even relaxing harp playlists. You give birth in a hot room with incense, prayers, and hopefully, not too much bleeding. Let's talk fashion. The linen dresses are light and breathable, but there's no underwear and no shoes. The sun hugs your skin, the sand gets everywhere, and the insects think you are a free buffet. Want makeup? Great. Egyptian women wore cosmetics, but they were lead-based and applied with sticks that looked suspiciously like toothpicks. Now, if you are lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family, things get better. You might learn to read, write, manage property accounts, or become a priestess. If you are born into royalty, you might even become pharaoh, like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, who ruled with brilliance and terrifying eyeliner. But if you are poor, your status may be legal, but your reality is physical. You work, you sweat, you bend, you carry, you birth, you bury, and you pray. You aren't chained by the law, but you are chained by survival. Still, Egyptian women had agency, and that mattered. They could speak in court, keep their inheritance, and did not become property upon marriage. Compared to many ancient societies, that is huge. So yes, Egyptian women had rights, but comfort was reserved for the statues and the goddesses, not for the woman with her elbows deep in dough while swatting flies off a toddler. You have survived another grueling day in ancient Egypt. You ate your sandy bread, hauled your buckets, avoided divine wrath, and maybe even dodged a sandstorm. It's time to relax, right? Wrong. Because in ancient Egypt, your real test begins after you die. Death is not the end. It is just the beginning of an incredibly bureaucratic, multi-phase journey through the underworld. And if you thought the quarry foreman was strict, wait until you meet the gods of judgment. First, your soul travels to the Hall of Ma'at. Here, before a tribunal of 42 deities, you must proclaim your innocence in what is basically history's oldest legal deposition. You say things like, "I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey," all while hoping the gods buy it. Then comes the test of the heart. Literally, your heart, which was believed to be the seat of the soul, is placed on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth, justice, and balance. If your heart is heavier than the feather, that means you've lived an evil life. Enter a meat, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, all terrifying. She doesn't arrest you, she doesn't judge you, she eats your soul, destroying it forever. No afterlife, no second chances, just eternal non-existence, which in a culture obsessed with eternity is the ultimate punishment. And it gets better. You can be condemned not just for your actions, but for your words. One wrong confession, one forgotten line during your judgment, and boom, spiritual obliteration. It's like an open book test where failing means being devoured by a mythological death hybrid. If you pass, congratulations. You get to enter the field of reeds, a peaceful, idealized version of Egypt, where your soul lives forever with boats, crops, family, and, presumably, fewer sand fleas. But the risk is enormous. This is why Egyptians were obsessed with tomb preparation, funeral rites, and magical texts like the Book of the Dead, a spiritual cheat sheet filled with prayers, spells, and helpful hints like, "Do not insult the crocodile god." So yes, the afterlife might be beautiful, but only if you live your life very, very carefully. One wrong word, one unpaid temple tax, and your next stop is Amit's lunch. Sleep tight. If there is one small mercy in ancient Egypt, it is this: blessed, breathable linen. Your entire wardrobe, and everyone else's, is made from this plant-based fabric. It is light, it is cool, and it lets your skin breathe in the searing heat. That's the good news. The bad news is, that's where the comfort ends. Whether you are a farmer, builder, priest, or merchant, you wear the same outfit every day. For men, a short white kilt or loincloth. For women, a straight, sleeveless linen sheath dress, sometimes held up by straps, sometimes not. If you are upper class, you might have pleats, beads, or fancy patterns. If you are not, it's plain white, or slightly greyish, depending on how long it's been since laundry day. Oh, and laundry day. You are washing your clothes by hand in the Nile, while hoping a hippopotamus doesn't emerge in the middle of your chore. Most people go barefoot. Sandals made of woven reeds or leather are reserved for special occasions or temple priests. So unless you are royalty, expect to spend your days with hot sand between your toes and possibly a sharp rock in your heel. Accessories. Absolutely, but mostly functional. Amulets for protection, necklaces to show status, and eye makeup made from powdered coal, which wasn't just for fashion. It helped cut the sun's glare and supposedly protected against infections. Yes, even eyeliner had a job in ancient Egypt. But no matter how well you dress, the insects do not care. Flies, mosquitoes, gnats, they treat your airy clothing like an invitation. You walk through your day constantly swatting, slathering yourself in scented oils, and praying your linen doesn't stick to you like a wet curtain the moment the sun hits its peak. And, of course, your wardrobe doesn't change with the seasons, because Egypt doesn't really have seasons. Just hot, and slightly less hot. So your linen ensemble is basically your year-round uniform, whether it's 110 degrees Fahrenheit or a chilly 70 degrees Fahrenheit night. So yes, Egyptian clothing was light, elegant, and far more comfortable than what the Romans would later wear. But don't let the breezy outfits fool you, because no matter how floaty your tunic feels, your life is still weighed down by labor, heat, sand, and insects that refuse to respect your personal space. You've survived another scorching day in Egypt, hauling bricks, dodging sandstorms, and praying your linen doesn't disintegrate mid-task. But in ancient Egypt, survival is always temporary, because no matter how tough you are, you probably won't live past 30 or 35. Let's break this down. If you make it past childhood, which is already an achievement, considering infant mortality rates were sky high, you are thrown directly into adulthood by age 13. Marriage, work, and child-rearing start early. Because honestly, you are running out of time. You could be killed by heat stroke, an infected cut, childbirth, crocodiles, scorpion stings, or bad bread. And forget antibiotics. If you get a fever, the best treatment is honey and herbs, and hoping the gods don't have other plans for your soul. But here's the twist. Egyptians didn't fear death. They prepared for it. In fact, they prepared for it better than most people prepare for retirement today. If you were wealthy, you commissioned a tomb, the ancient version of a 5-star eternity suite. You started saving up funerary goods, jewelry, food offerings, perfumes, statues, even little servant dolls called shaptis, to do your chores in the afterlife. Think of them as spiritual interns who work while you sleep forever. Your body was mummified, wrapped in linen, packed in natron, a natural salt, and carefully placed in a painted sarcophagus. You were buried with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which was less about the final destination and more of a mystical travel guide, complete with afterlife passwords, spells to confuse demons, and instructions on not getting eaten by soul-devouring monsters. If you were poor, well, your tomb was probably a shallow pit in the sand. Your body was wrapped in whatever fabric your family could afford, maybe a pot or two placed nearby, and then covered with dirt. No murals, no gold mask, just you and the wind. But even the poorest Egyptians held on to the dream of the afterlife. A peaceful, fertile paradise called the Field of Reeds, where they would farm without sweat, eat without hunger, and sail the Nile forever, under a gentle, forgiving Sunday. Yes, you will probably die young in ancient Egypt, but if you lived well, prayed correctly, and didn't insult too many jackal-headed gods, you just might spend eternity in style. You finally made it to the afterlife, or at least, to the tomb. You have been mummified, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace, right? Well, not exactly, because in ancient Egypt, even the dead get robbed. Let's start with a simple truth. Tombs are filled with expensive stuff. Gold amulets, jewelry, scented oils, carved statues, chests of linen, and for pharaohs, literally, boats full of treasure, all intended to be taken into the afterlife. But treasure in a tomb is basically an open invitation for someone with a chisel and bad intentions. Tomb robbing was so common It became a full-time problem. Pharaohs tried to combat it by hiding their tombs in deep cliffs, locking them behind trapdoors, and scrawling terrifying curses on the walls. Things like, "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your limbs be twisted forever by a serpent made of fire." Spoiler alert, the curses didn't work. The tomb robbers came anyway, at night, in secret, with inside information. Sometimes they were locals, sometimes they were corrupt workers who helped build the tombs. In some cases, even priests and guards were in on it, and the punishment for getting caught was severe. Think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or death. But considering how valuable tomb goods were, especially gold and rare incense, the risk often seemed worth it. After all, the dead don't fight back. But it wasn't just the rich who were robbed. Even commoners' graves were desecrated. Poorer Egyptians might have been buried with a small jar of beer or a loaf of bread for the afterlife. But that was still worth stealing. Food was scarce, tools were valuable, and linen was currency. The irony. Tomb. Robbing wasn't just about greed. Sometimes it was about survival. Egypt went through famines, political collapse, and invasions. A starving worker might break into a tomb, not for treasure, but for food. And when your children are starving, a few funerary offerings look less like sacred objects and more like dinner. So, in ancient Egypt, you weren't safe just because you were dead. Your tomb could be plundered, your name erased, and your mummy unwrapped by some desperate soul with a pickaxe and poor moral judgment. Rest in peace, only if nobody knows where you are buried. We have all seen them, those majestic, mysterious carvings on temple and tomb walls. Birds, eyes, serpents, lotus flowers, men walking sideways like they are on a fashion runway. The hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt, visually stunning and incredibly difficult to learn. Sure, they look cool, but try reading them. Hieroglyphs were not just decorative art, they were a complete writing system, with over 700 characters and growing. Some symbols represent whole words, others are sounds, and many are determinatives that clarify the meaning. Because, writing the word star with an actual star symbol might be too simple. And don't expect spaces or punctuation. Ancient Egyptian script was basically one long, beautiful riddle with artistic flair, 0 vowels, and a deep need for context. Oh, and it could be written left to right to left, or top to bottom, depending on whatever the scribe felt like that day. The trick, the look at which way the birds or people are facing. That's your reading direction. If they look right, you read right. If they look left, you read left. And if they are upside down, good luck. Learning to write hieroglyphs was not for commoners. Literacy was rare. Maybe 1% of the population could read and write. If you wanted in, you had to become a scribe, which meant years of intense schooling. Starting as children, they memorized hundreds of symbols, copied endless scrolls, and practiced so much their hand probably cramped into a claw by age 15. But the payoff was huge. Scribes were respected, well-fed, and never forced to haul bricks in the Sunday. Instead, they wrote tax records, court documents, letters, and religious texts. They were essential to society and shielded from most manual labor. In a world where writing was power, scribes quietly ruled from the shadows. For the rest of the population, though, writing was magical. Literally, hieroglyphs were believed to hold sacred power. Writing someone's name preserved their soul. Erasing it was total spiritual annihilation. So yeah, spelling really mattered. So, while hieroglyphs might look like ancient emojis, they are more like a linguistic Rubik's Cube, wrapped in myth, math, and mystery. Beautiful? Yes. Easy to learn? Absolutely not. After 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and back-breaking labor, it is time to ask the big question. Would you survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest. Probably not. Sure, it's easy to romanticize the ancient world. Golden tombs, lotus-scented air, elegant hieroglyphs, animal-headed gods with a penchant for order and beauty. But behind the iconic monuments and stunning art, there was a world of brutal realities that spared no one but the elite. Your average day in Egypt began with a dirt floor, a cloud of flies, and the certainty that if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You walked barefoot on burning sand. You hauled water. You cooked over open fires. You lived cheek to jowl with insects, smoke, and livestock. You worried about disease, divine punishment, and whether a snake might slither onto your sleeping mat. You had no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan, and if you were lucky, maybe 2 changes of linen. You served a god king who could take your land with a decree, a climate that cooked your skin by noon, and a religion that required you to pass a literal divine test after death, just to get into the good version of the afterlife. Let's also not forget the things you didn't have: antibiotics, sunscreen, privacy, plumbing, painkillers, and no easy escape. Once you were born into your social class, that was it. No promotions, no career changes, no finding yourself. You were a scribe, a farmer, a laborer, a mother, a servant, or you were dead. And yet, despite all this, the ancient Egyptians were not miserable. They believed deeply in their gods, their purpose, and the beauty of life. They loved music, dance, food, family, and festivals. They joked, they painted, they imagined eternity clearly enough to build stone monuments that still stand today. But for a modern person, without your air conditioning, your filtered water, your Advil, your sneakers, and your smartphone, you would tap out before the second sandstorm hit. So no, you would not last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's okay, because they lasted for thousands of years. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we still talk about them. In the heart of ancient Teotihuacán, a pyramid refuses to be forgotten. Its surface is adorned not with peaceful symbols of faith or gentle gods, but with dozens of stone serpents, their maws open and threatening. They jut from the temple facade, as if frozen in mid-strike, fangs bared, eyes wide. This is the temple of the Feathered Serpent, known to many as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike most temples that rise to the sky in reverence, this one feels different. It feels predatory. From the moment you approach, there is an eerie sense of being watched. The stone serpent heads are not mere decoration. They were warnings, symbols of divine anger. And beneath their gaze, something horrendous once happened. Excavations in recent decades have revealed something archaeologists did not expect. Hidden beneath the temple's base, there were not just ceremonial offerings, but something far more disturbing: human remains. And not a handful, but over 200 bodies, many of them decapitated, their hands bound behind their backs. Young men, warriors perhaps, buried in groups, ritual sacrifices, arranged with mathematical precision. Some were buried with obsidian knives at their sides, others with necklaces made of human teeth or jewelry crafted from jawbones. They were not simply thrown into the ground. They were deliberately placed in positions of symbolic meaning. It is clear this was not a mass grave. It was a message, a divine transaction carved in stone and sealed in blood. But what kind of belief system justifies such horror? Who demanded that so many lives be taken at once? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not just a religious building. It was a theater of power, a place where rulers merged cosmology, warfare, and fear to maintain control over a city of over 100,000 souls. And this ritual bloodshed may have been the cost of keeping the cosmos in balance. As you stand before this temple today, gazing at these stone serpents, you are not just looking at art or architecture. You are looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed the gods needed blood and that they had every right to provide it. But who were these people who commanded such violence and vanished without a trace? The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacán. Before the mighty Aztec Empire, before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar in stone, there existed a city unlike any other in the ancient Americas, Teotihuacán. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, means the place where the gods were born. And when you walk its immense avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids that scratch the heavens, you begin to understand why. At its peak, around 100 to 250 amperes, Teotihuacán was a sprawling metropolis of over 100,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time, rivaling Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and influence. It was a meticulously planned city, with wide boulevards, gridded streets, apartment compounds that housed extended families, multi-story structures made of volcanic stone, and at the center of it all, 3 massive pyramids: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But here, is what makes Teotihuacán different. Nobody knows who built it. Seriously. To this day, we do not know the name of the people who built this place. We don't even know what they called themselves. There are no written records, no kings' names carved in stone. Teotihuacán seems to have been a society ruled not by a single monarch, but perhaps by a council, a theocracy, or something entirely alien to our understanding of ancient power. And despite this anonymity, its influence was colossal. Evidence of Teotihuacán's power has been found hundreds of miles away, from the Maya cities of Tikal and Copan to the distant Zapotec capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, pottery styles, murals, and even political meddling. In one case, Teotihuacano emissaries may have helped overthrow a local Maya king to install a ruler more favorable to their interests. But how did they maintain such a vast network? How did a city with no known writing system command such authority across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined cosmic ideology with statecraft. Their temples were more than places of worship. They were tools of control, aligning perfectly with astronomical events, serving as theaters of ritual sacrifice, and reminding every citizen and every visitor that Teotihuacán was not an ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept destiny and blood flowing in sync. And at the heart of it all stood the temple of the Feathered Serpent. To understand the temple, you must first understand the deity it was dedicated to, the Feathered Serpent, known later by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl and by the Maya as Kukulkan. This figure is one of the most enigmatic gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. But at Teotihuacán, centuries before the Aztecs rose to power, the Feathered Serpent was already a central, possibly supreme, divine force. But here is the paradox. What kind of god is both a serpent and a bird? Think about it. Serpents slither in the underworld. They shed their skin, symbolizing rebirth, duality, and death. And birds. They soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and the life-giving wind. To combine these two elements, earthly death and celestial life, chaos and order, was to create something utterly cosmic, something terrifyingly powerful. The Feathered Serpent was not just a god, it was a bridge between worlds. On the temple's facade, carved in deep relief, we see dozens of its images: bulging eyes, bared teeth, feathered headdresses. Some historians believe they represent the god itself. Others suggest they are warriors or priestly figures adorned in divine regalia to signal their authority. Either way, they are everywhere. The temple is covered in these serpent-bird hybrids, as if the structure itself breathes with divine presence. But the Feathered Serpent was not just a god of the skies. It was intimately tied to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos moving, and Quetzalcoatl, though later remembered as a gentle, civilizing deity, had a much darker role in Teotihuacán. He demanded offerings, and not just of maize or incense, but of life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create humanity. But to bring life from death, there had to be an exchange. The gods sacrificed for humanity, and humans were expected to do the same in return. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not just a monument to faith, it was a cosmic engine designed to link heaven, earth, and the underworld through ritual. Every stone, every serpent head, every buried victim fueled that system. Teotihuacán did not just worship the feathered serpent, it embodied its logic, paradox, power, and blood. And the most disturbing truths were hidden just beneath the surface. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stood silent, an imposing weathered structure, half swallowed by time. Locals whispered legends, scholars made guesses, but no one could have imagined what was buried beneath its layered stones, until archaeologists broke through in the late 1980s and early 2000s. What they found was not just unexpected, it was chilling. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations was a series of long, sealed chambers and pits, each filled with carefully arranged human remains. These were not the messy results of war or disease. They were deliberate, systematic, ritualistic sacrifices, cold. The victims, numbering over 200, were young men, many between 15 and 25 years old. Some wore necklaces made of human jawbones, Others had their hands tied behind their backs. A few were decapitated. Obsidian knives, sharp and black as night, were scattered nearby, the unmistakable tools of ritual killing. And here is where it gets darker. The arrangement of the bodies followed geometric and symbolic patterns. They were not buried randomly. They were placed in quadrants, in cardinal directions, possibly to mirror the cosmos. Even the number of bodies mattered. This was not just death, it was meaningful death. Offerings surrounded the victims: jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines, and obsidian blades that had never been used in battle. This was not a punishment. It was a gift. These young men, most likely warriors, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but to die as part of something transcendent for the Teotihuacanos. The very act of building a temple may have required human sacrifice. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood, every layer raised only after an offering had been made. The deeper they dug, the more sacrifices they found. In one chamber, archaeologists discovered elaborate tunnels filled with mercury and mica, materials associated with the underworld. The ground glittered like water. Was this a symbolic passage to the land of the dead? A mirror of the night sky? The more they dug, the more it seemed the temple was not built on death, but built to enclose it. The blood did not stain the stone by accident. The stone was meant to hold the blood, and it was all for the gods. Look closer at the temple of the Feathered Serpent, and you will notice something strange, something uncanny. It does not just sit on the landscape, it aligns with the universe. Teotihuacán was not built randomly. The entire city was laid out along precise cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead runs at an angle of 25 degrees east of true north. Not a mistake, but a deliberate shift, possibly to align with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster or the sun on specific ritual dates. The temple of the Feathered Serpent sits directly along this avenue, locking it into a grand celestial blueprint. But why? What were they trying to align with? Archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have debated this for decades. Some suggest the temple aligns with the equinox sunrise. Others argue it connects to Venus, the most sacred planet for Mesoamerican civilizations, often associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When Venus rose or set, wars were declared, offerings were made, and temples were activated with ritual fire. Even the temple's dimensions seem intentional. The repetition of the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears in its stepped platforms. There is symmetry, rhythm, and a staggering understanding of both earthly mathematics and cosmic cycles. And beneath the surface, more clues. In 2003, archaeologists discovered a tunnel beneath the temple. Not a rough passageway, but a deliberately constructed underworld. The walls were once covered in powdered pyrite, a glittering mineral that would have reflected light like starlight, combined with pools of mercury and mica-lined walls. The tunnel seemed designed to replicate the cosmos itself. To walk through it would be like traveling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey into the underworld, or perhaps to rebirth. Was this temple not just a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine, a portal that aligned earth, sky, and the spiritual realm? Some scholars believe Teotihuacán viewed time as circular, not linear. Every ritual, every building, every sacrifice was not a one-time event. It was part of an eternal cycle. Death leading to renewal, sacrifice feeding rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped predict celestial movements, coordinate harvests, and most importantly, determine when to offer blood. The temple of the Feathered Serpent was not just watching the stars, it was trying to talk to them. The temple of the Feathered Serpent was not just a spiritual beacon, it was a political weapon. Its very design was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, to remind every onlooker, local or foreign, who held the reins of power in Teotihuacán. Imagine standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You, a visitor from a smaller city-state, would arrive on the Avenue of the Dead, already awed by the sheer scale of Teotihuacán. But when you reached the temple of the Feathered Serpent, you would freeze. The serpent heads would stare down at you, their fangs bared. Jaguar symbols would roar from the stone. The plaza in front once hosted mass gatherings, not just for celebration, but for public ritual. You might even witness a sacrifice, The ruling elite of Teotihuacán understood something crucial. Fear is power, and nothing inspires more fear than divine wrath. By orchestrating ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and death imagery, they sent a clear message: the gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this was not chaos. It was theatre. Priests in feathered headdresses and obsidian masks would chant, dance, and spill blood, turning cosmic myth into a political performance. This was not just about pleasing the gods. It was about reminding everyone watching that the city's rulers had a direct line to the divine. Only they could unlock the heavens, or call the rain, or protect the people, or destroy their enemies. Even the architecture helped reinforce this propaganda. From the temple's upper levels, leaders could look down upon the plaza, controlling not only the narrative, but the very physical space in which it unfolded. The people looked up, at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices, and knew their place. And for outsiders, Teotihuacán did not need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries would bring home stories of awe and terror. They would speak of the feathered serpents, the endless avenues, the blood rituals that lit the sky red. In a world where gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacán positioned itself as their chosen mouthpiece, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its peak, Teotihuacán was the heart of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. But around 550 amperes D, something changed, something broke, and the silence that followed was as chilling as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacán was not loud and glorious. It was gradual, then sudden. Signs of tension began appearing decades earlier, signs that the cosmic engine was sputtering. Evidence points to a long period of drought, crop failures, and social unrest. The very systems that had sustained this great city, centralized power, religious dominance, cosmic order, began to crack under the strain. And then came the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered extensive burn layers across elite compounds, temples, and administrative buildings, including signs of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The strange part? The lower-class residential areas remained mostly untouched. This was not an outside invasion. It was an uprising, a rebellion, possibly from within. The same people who once watched the sacrifices in awe may have turned on their priest kings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, once a symbol of divine authority, was ransacked. Sculptures were smashed, fires were set, ritual spaces were desecrated, and then, silence. Teotihuacán was not completely abandoned overnight, but it lost its soul. The trade networks collapsed, the artistic production ceased, the grand rituals stopped, the ruling elite vanished. The temple no longer spoke, and yet the mystery only deepened, because as the city faded, its memory endured. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon its ruins. They were astonished. They believed the gods had built this place. They named it Teotihuacán, the place where the gods were born. They built their own myths around its pyramids, venerating it as sacred ground, even though they had no idea who its original builders were. To them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin, it was a relic of divine truth. But the irony remains. The most powerful city of its time, built on cosmic order and blood, vanished without a written word, without a final record, leaving behind only stone and questions. The gods, it seems, had gone silent. For over 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay buried under layers of dust, volcanic ash, and silence. Locals avoided it, farmers tilled around it, and the world forgot it until the modern age of archaeology, and cracked open the secrets buried in its heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began excavating Teotihuacán. What they found was staggering: a perfectly designed city, far older than the Aztecs. But it wasn't until the 1982s and 2000s that the temple itself began to reveal its most intimate and chilling secrets. One of the most dramatic discoveries occurred in 2011, when researchers uncovered a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been deliberately closed off nearly 1,800 years earlier, as if to prevent anyone from ever entering. After years of excavation, scientists unearthed a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld. lined with pyrite to mimic a starry sky, pools of mercury, and thousands of ritual objects, jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, and even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb and more like a message. Why would the ancient builders go to such lengths? What were they trying to preserve or hide? Some experts believe the tunnel was used in initiation rituals. Others suggest it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological womb where gods were born, where kings were made, where the divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. The mercury, once considered only toxic, may have represented water, or the fluid veil between worlds. And among all these glittering fragments was a lingering whisper. The feathered serpent still remained, not just as a myth, but as a presence. In murals, in carvings, in the geometry of the temple itself, the serpent had not vanished. It had coiled inward, deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with every excavation, every jawbone uncovered or golden ornament, we get a little closer to its message. One carved not in language, but in stone, sacrifice, and shadow. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all our tools, one truth remains. The temple still holds secrets. Today, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not just to a long-vanished civilization, but to a way of thinking that fused power, cosmos, and death into one unbreakable system. Tourists take photos, children run past the stone serpent heads, but the ground beneath their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and over 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple endures. Its legacy is not just architectural, it is psychological, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of sky and earth, continued to evolve. It would be adopted by the Toltecs, then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his myth took on a gentler tone. The bearer of knowledge, the god who wept for humanity, the one who promised to return. This reimagining of the serpent god shows how myths do not die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of the feathered serpent persist, in art, in murals, in literature, and in the national identity. The temple's image has appeared on currency, stamps, and even government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian brilliance, and of the untamed spiritual world that once pulsed through Mesoamerica. But there is another legacy, one less visible, more uncomfortable. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent forces us to confront the price of belief. It asks hard questions. How far will humans go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty coexist with terror? In many ways, the temple is not just a historical site. It is a mirror, a reflection of ourselves. Our fascination with the afterlife, our hunger for meaning, our capacity to build monuments of stunning beauty, and to stain them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness comes with shadows, that civilizations can rise to impossible heights, while burying their secrets beneath the stones. And perhaps that is why we keep coming back, not just to visit, but to understand. Because deep down, we know the serpent is still watching, not to strike, but to remind us of what we once were and what we still might be. Before we spoke with words, we spoke with rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the invention of writing, even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand striking a hollow log, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stomping the earth in sync. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical emerged. The first drum beat. It wasn't called music. It wasn't called anything, but it felt like something, like communication, like movement, like emotion taking shape. Anthropologists have discovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments dating back over 30,000 years. They were likely made of natural materials. Hollowed trees, gourds, stretched animal skins, nothing sophisticated, nothing preserved. But these crude drums were not toys or idle distractions. They served real purposes. To warn, to summon, to connect. Imagine a tribe scattered across a dense forest. A thud from a distant drum, and others knew danger was approaching. or that a celebration had begun, or that the gods were listening. The first drums were not just tools, they were extensions of the human body, an externalized heartbeat, a pulse that could be felt across a valley. Drumming was not something you watched or listened to, it was something you participated in, together, around fires, under the stars, in caves where the echoes made the very air vibrate. These ancient rhythms became a language of emotion, joy, grief, warning, hope, all expressed not in syllables or symbols, but in patterned sound. Before the first flutes were carved, before stringed instruments were dreamed of, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, shaping ritual, and binding individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument, and perhaps its first form of collective identity. No matter where on earth people lived, they created something to hit, something to beat, something to mark the moment. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human civilization, drums were not just instruments, they were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, every corner of the earth developed its own rhythm, but the purpose was almost universal, to commune with the unseen. In Africa, where some of the world's oldest drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with life, death, and ancestry. The djembe, carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin, was believed to contain three spirits. The spirit of the tree it was carved from, the spirit of the animal whose skin gave it voice, and the spirit of the artisan who gave it life. Played in circles, the djembe didn't just accompany rituals, it was the ritual. Then there were the talking drums, capable of mimicking human speech through pitch and tone. In West Africa, these drums transmitted messages across miles, relaying news, warnings, births, and deaths from one village to another. Long before the telephone, humans were already drumming their messages across the landscape. Across the oceans, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living entity, the heartbeat of Mother Earth, played in ceremonies to honor ancestors, invoke healing, or guide the souls of the dead. The large powwow drum, played by a circle of drummers, was both a musical and spiritual engine, a communal pulse that aligned humans with nature and spirit. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples used clapsticks and rhythmic stamping in the sacred dream time, a mythic era of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans beat frame drums to enter trance states, seeking visions or communicating with spirits during the long, dark winters. These were not performances. They were acts of survival, healing, storytelling, and connection. To drum was to remember. To drum was to belong. And it was always communal. Drums brought people together in sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. No sheet music, no stage, just bodies moving, hands striking, souls stirring, all unified by the beat. It didn't matter where on earth you were. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was happening, something that words alone could never express. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken, sometimes with comfort and sometimes with command. As human societies evolved into kingdoms and empires, drums transformed into tools of domination, instruments of order, and weapons of fear. Early armies had no radios or megaphones. They had drums. In ancient China, massive drums called bao were beaten to coordinate troops across vast terrains. With a single resonant strike, commanders could signal a charge, a retreat, or a flanking maneuver. These drums weren't just loud, they were strategic. Each rhythm meant something specific, and trained soldiers knew how to listen, even through the chaos of battle. In Mesopotamia, temple drums were used to announce rulers and summon the public, but in times of conflict, they boomed across city walls, terrifying enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they carried the tympanum, a frame drum used in processions and by cults like that of Cybele. While not a battlefield instrument like the horns and standards, it held symbolic power, a sound of empire, discipline, and order. But no army wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. Their meta bands, the world's first known military orchestras, unleashed an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battles. The incessant pounding of the kos, giant kettle drums, and the davul double-headed bass drums struck terror into the hearts of enemy forces. Some European accounts describe soldiers freezing in panic before even seeing the Ottomans, paralyzed by the sound. Drums enforced power off the battlefield too. In the royal courts of Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles announced arrivals, marked coronations, and punctuated political rituals. To play a drum was to declare, "The power is present." Even the enslaved in the Americas used drums as tools of resistance. On plantations, rhythmic communication kept culture alive and helped orchestrate secret rebellions. The drum, even under oppression, refused to be silenced. So whether it signaled divine right, military discipline, or sheer fear, the drum has always carried a message. This is who rules, this is who marches, and this is the rhythm of power. As civilizations spread across continents, so did their rhythms, evolving in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became tools of precision, spirituality, and ceremony. In the West, they leaned toward military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two paths, one beat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of divine language. The tabla, with its crisp tones and fluid grace, was used in classical music and devotional performances. But it was more than accompaniment. It was conversation. Every single strike had a name, a meaning, a syllabic identity. Indian percussion wasn't just percussion. It was spoken poetry. Trained for decades, the tabla player was not just a musician, he was a linguist of rhythm. In Japan, the taiko drum emerged as a ceremonial giant, played in Shinto rituals, theater, and warfare. The taiko required not just technical skill, but physical discipline. Drummers moved with martial precision, their stances firm as warriors. At festivals, the thundering taiko would echo through mountain valleys, believed to drive away evil spirits and call the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic flows of the gamelan orchestras, guiding dancers and musicians in sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were layered, interlocking, and celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony. Across the world, in Europe, drums had a different history. They were largely utilitarian during the medieval period, signaling soldiers, marking time, enforcing discipline. It wasn't until the Renaissance and Baroque periods that drums began to enter formal music, and even then, they were kept in the background, thundering gently beneath royal fanfare or resonating in grand cathedrals. In this divergence, you see two philosophies. The East saw rhythm as art and spirit, something tied to breath, chant, and meditation. The West saw it as structure and force, a tool to gather, to march, and to measure. But both understood the drum's central power, to shape time, to dictate pace, to elevate ritual, to connect humans in ways that transcend language. East or West, sacred or strategic, the drum remained central, always listening, always speaking. From mountaintop temples to jungle clearings, from desert fires to candlelit cathedrals, drums have always held a place where the human meets the divine. Long before organized religion took root, rhythm was already a sacred language, a way to pray, to summon, to transcend. In Africa, drums were not just instruments, they were spiritual beings. In Yoruba traditions, for example, the bata drum was used to communicate with the orishas, gods and ancestral spirits. The drummers were not performers, they were priests. The rhythms they played were coded prayers, inviting the gods to descend and dance among the living. Every pattern had a purpose, every strike a direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears even in the hands of the gods. The deity Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, dances the cosmic dance of creation and destruction holding a small, hourglass-shaped drum, the damaru. Its beat represents the pulse of the universe itself, from silence to sound, from void to form. The drum is a divine heartbeat. In Buddhism, the ritual frame drum is used in monastic chants and meditation ceremonies. Its slow, gentle strikes guide the breath and awareness, acting as a metronome for the soul. It is not loud, it is not aggressive. It simply reminds the practitioner to return, again and again, to the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous tribes use drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The rhythm is steady, constant, mimicking the rhythm of the womb, helping participants enter trance states or connect with ancestral spirits. In these spaces, the drum does not just accompany the prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm was often suppressed, the drum still found a sacred role in gospel traditions, particularly in African American churches. Drums became a medium of praise and power, a heartbeat behind voices raised in devotion, a reminder of struggle, hope, and the divine rhythm in every life. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the God being called, the drum has been there, not as decoration, but as a vessel for energy, intention, and the mysteries we cannot speak. Because when words fail in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were solitary instruments, one body, one sound, one purpose. But in the heart of the industrial age, something revolutionary happened. In factories, streets, and music halls, percussion was reimagined. And by the early 20th century, multiple drums were no longer scattered across a stage. They were brought together, forming something entirely new, the drum set. It was born from necessity. In the late 19th century, military and theatre bands required multiple percussionists to play the bass drum, snare drum, cymbals, and woodblocks, each handled by a different person. But space was limited, and budgets were tighter. So, drummers began combining instruments into a single, playable setup. In 1909, the first bass drum pedal was patented. A drummer could now strike a massive drum with one foot, freeing up their hands to do more. The idea caught on. Over the next few decades, drummers added hi-hats, toms, cowbells, and ride cymbals, creating a setup that could mimic an entire percussion section, all from a single seat. What emerged was more than a tool. It was a drummer's throne. And then came jazz. In the smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum set exploded into life. Jazz drummers didn't just keep time. They played the drums like a voice, with syncopation, swing, and sensitivity. Legends like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich turned the drum set into a lead instrument. Rhythm became storytelling. As jazz evolved into rock and roll, the drums got louder, heavier, more powerful. The 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds saw sets grow, with multiple toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed the limits of endurance and creativity. The drummer was no longer in the background. He or she was the engine. Today, the drum set is a global staple. From gospel churches to electronic dance music stages, from punk garages to world tours. And even as digital drums and drum machines emerge, the physicality of a live acoustic drum set, the sticks, the skins, the sweat, remains irreplaceable. It is a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries, where tradition meets innovation, and where one drummer can speak with 10 voices at once. The world beats in 1,000 dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent, culture to culture, the drum has taken on countless forms, each with a distinct identity, sound, and purpose. These are not just instruments. They are cultural signatures, crafted from local materials, shaped by local hands, and soaked in the rhythms of daily life. In West Africa, the djembe remains the heartbeat of community gatherings. It speaks with sharp slaps and deep bass tones, designed for storytelling and spontaneous conversation. Beside it, the dundun provides the foundational pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others can dance. In Africa, a drum ensemble is not just music. It is a conversation between spirits, ancestors, and the living. In the Middle East, the darbuka, a goblet-shaped drum made of clay or metal, provides sharp, rapid rhythms, essential for belly dance and classical Arabic music. Its voice is high and articulate, demanding precision from its player and movement from its listeners. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell a different story, one born of resistance and fusion. The conga, bongo, and timbal reflect the blend of African, indigenous, and Spanish influences. In Cuba, the sacred batar drums are used in Santeria rituals, each drum speaking a divine language tied to the orishas. In Brazil, the thunder of the surdo and the squeak of the cuica drive samba parades through the streets, infusing joy into protest, prayer, and carnival. In India, the mridangam and the tabla dominate classical music of the south and north, respectively. These drums are so precise they are tuned to a pitch, blurring the line between rhythm and melody. Every finger movement matters. Every strike carries centuries of tradition. Then there is the frame drum, one of the oldest in human history, appearing in everything from the Persian daf to the Irish bodhran, from shamanic tools to folk ensembles. It is played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes, and is proof that even simplicity can be sacred. What unites them all is purpose. Whether guiding dance, healing, ritual, or revolution, each drum reflects the soul of its people. Its rhythms carry geography, history, and identity. The global family of drums is not just diverse, it is universal, because no matter where you go, the earth still rings with rhythm. As the 20th century came to a close, the sound of drums began to change, not in rhythm, but in texture. The physical gave way to the programmable. Sweaty palms, wooden sticks, calloused fingertips, all began to share space with circuits, pads, and software. The age of digital drumming had arrived. It began in the 1970 seconds with primitive drum machines. Early devices like the Rhythmicon and the Roland CR78, which used analog circuits to simulate basic beats. At first, they sounded robotic, even clumsy. But musicians saw something else: consistency, control, and endless possibility. Then came a revolution. In 1980, Roland released the TR-808, a drum machine so iconic, its deep, booming bass drum and crisp snare would come to define entire genres. Hip-hop, techno, electro, and trap were born, in part, from its synthetic pulse. It was no longer about mimicking acoustic drums. It was about creating entirely new sounds. As digital audio advanced, so did the tools. Electronic drum kits, like the Roland V-drums, allowed drummers to play naturally, while triggering thousands of sampled or synthesized tones. Artists could now practice silently, record without microphones, and change drum kits with the push of a button. And with computers came digital audio workstations, DAWs like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Now, anyone with a laptop could build complex rhythms, layering kicks, snares, hats, and sub-basses into vast sonic architectures. Finger drumming on MIDI pads became an art form in its own right. Some feared this shift meant the death of traditional drumming, a replacement of human feel with cold precision. But that didn't happen. Instead, hybridization emerged. Acoustic drummers began integrating triggers and samples into their kits. Producers began layering human-played drums with machine beats. The organic and the synthetic found a groove together. Digital drums didn't erase the past. They reimagined it. And today, we live in a world where a single person in a bedroom can build beats that once required entire orchestras, where ancient rhythms from Africa, Asia, and the Americas can be sampled, twisted, and given new life on neon-lit dance floors. The tools have changed, but the purpose remains the same: to move bodies, to shape time, to make the silence speak. Through every era, every empire, and every technological evolution, one thing has never changed. The drum remains our oldest, most enduring voice. From ancient fire circles to modern concert halls, from sacred rituals to digital dance floors, the drum has never been just about music. It is about connection, to ourselves, to each other, to something bigger. It is the one heartbeat we all share, not metaphorically, literally. Because even before we are born, curled in the womb, the first rhythm we ever hear is our mother's heart, steady, safe, alive. And when life begins, we chase that rhythm forever. The drum has been our companion through joy and war, through worship and protest. It has marched alongside kings and risen up with rebels. It has echoed through temples and subway tunnels. It speaks every language, because it is a language that bypasses thought and speaks directly to the body, to the bones, to the blood. In times of grief, we drum to mourn. In times of ecstasy, we drum to celebrate. And in the quiet spaces in between, we drum to remember who we are. Today, percussion continues to evolve. You can find handpan street musicians weaving new age rhythms on city corners. Indigenous communities preserving ancient drumming traditions against all odds. Stadium drummers, rousing crowds in unison. Children banging on pots and pans with instinctive joy. Even artificial intelligence is learning rhythm, but no algorithm can replicate the human soul behind a single, imperfect strike. Because rhythm is not just counted, it is felt. And perhaps that is why the drum has outlasted empires and trends, because deep down we all crave the anchor of time, the shared pulse that tells us we are here, together. Now, no matter how advanced our instruments become, or how virtual our experiences grow, there will always be something deeply grounding in the skin on skin, the stick on hide, the hand on wood, a beat, a breath, a beginning. The drum is not a relic of the past. It is a reminder that we were always meant to move in rhythm, to listen, to feel, to play. And as long as humanity endures, the drum will never be silent. Thus we come to the end of this dreamlike journey through history, unraveling the invisible threads that connect our nightly dreams with the civilizations that came before us. We have seen how the fears, hopes, and wonders of each era filtered into the labyrinth of the sleeping mind, leaving indelible traces on the tapestry of consciousness. From the divine omens of ancient Egypt to the longings for prosperity of its peasants, from the echoes of power and mystery of Teotihuacán to the dizzying ambition etched on the horizon, we have witnessed how the human spirit, in its infinite manifestations, has always sought to make sense of the world around it, both in wakefulness and in the deep silence of the night. May these stories, these fleeting visions of the past, resonate in your own dreams as night falls. May you find in that dream realm a space for reflection, for calm, for connection with those ancestral voices that still whisper secrets into the ear of our imagination. And as you close your eyes, remember that each of us is one more link in this unbroken chain of dreamers, weaving our own stories into the vast universe of the night. May your rest be restorative, and your dreams sweet companions on the threshold of a new day. Until the next adventure in Dreams with History.